Now, for the reason you're all here tonight, we have a very special, compelling, and timely presentation for you tonight. And to introduce our speaker tonight, I'd like to ask our good friend and a member of the Steamboat Institute's National Advisory Board, Bob Beaupre, to introduce our speaker tonight. Come on up, Bob.
Thank you, Jennifer, and I am so happy to see the room full tonight for what I think is going to be an excellent presentation. I got to know Dr. Michael Levine, I guess a couple years ago, electronically. I actually just met him face-to-face tonight for the first time, too. Before I got to know him, I actually got to know his good wife, like many of us guys. He subscribes to the theory of marry up and be grateful. I certainly do. And his wife, Barbara, helped me put together a series I wrote on my website, Line of Sight, over a 3-month period about Iran at our doorstep, which is a good lead-in to Dr. Ledeen's field of expertise. In my experience, certainly in Congress and otherwise, I've had the pleasure of coming across and meeting a great many people, some pretty notable folks, and there's no shortage of people that seem to have an opinion. A great many of those people that have opinions don't necessarily have knowledge behind their opinions. That's for sure. Dr. Ledeen certainly has the knowledge. I think he is, in fact, on the way over here tonight, I was trying to think of someone else I might suggest or recommend to talk about Iran, Iraq, terrorism, radical Islam, our perilous situation of national and global security. And I'm not sure we could have come up with anyone better. Dr. Ledeen, how many of you have written a book? How many of you have written a letter? Dr. Ledeen has written, I don't know, 25 that I'm aware of, books, and it's probably more than that by now. Most prolific writer I can think of, and that doesn't count the hundreds, probably thousands of articles he's had published in places like Pajama Media, which he's a regular contributor to, National Journal, which he's a regular contributor to, my website, alignofsight.com, which he's published some 8 or 10 articles so far on. Most recently one about the Syria question, which I'm sure he's going to touch on tonight, and how to solve the theme of that article was that if you're going to solve the problem in Damascus, you'd better look at Tehran. It is really an extreme honor to introduce someone to you who has been an advisor to our National Security Council, the State Department, a special advisor to a Secretary of State, an advisor to our Defense Department. You are in the midst tonight of one of the great experts in the world on the subject that he's going to talk to you about. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Michael Levine.
If you don't read A Line of Sight, you should, which is Bob's website. It's terrific. And whenever I read it, I mean, it serves a dual function. First, it gives me pleasure to read such high-quality stuff, and second, it makes me feel guilty that I haven't written more for him. And I know I should. And if you live in Washington and you don't feel guilty, there's something wrong with you. So that helps me. That business, you really struck a chord, Bob, when you talked about knowledge and opinions. And myself, I find that the older I get, and therefore the more I think I know. Well, we're going to have the medical people will come later and help with hearing problems and so on. Is that better? Is that better? That's way better? All right. Good. Where was I? Because my main problem is I forget where I was. Anyway, as I get older and therefore presumably wiser, I find that I have fewer and fewer opinions. That is, more and more, I mean, years ago I would look at things going on and I would understand them. And today I look at things going on and I must confess that more and more I don't understand them. I am baffled by them. So maybe that'll make you feel good that some overpraised person from Washington comes out here and confesses that he doesn't understand it either. You know, I live in a town where all the World War II monuments are being barricaded by the president. And none of the World War I monuments are being barricaded. And I would like someone to explain that to me. Why World War II and not World War I? And the closest I can get to an explanation is that all the World War I people are dead. So there's no one to offend there, whereas some of the World War II people are still there, and he likes being provocative and he likes getting people angry and all of that. Well, before I get serious, years ago I used to lecture on terrorism. And you know, it's traditional to start every speech with something funny. And terrorism was a challenge. It was a challenge to find, you know, what's an appropriate joke that you can tell that has to do with terrorism and people still laugh. So the closest I could get to it, which really helps a lot with what I want to talk about also tonight, is the story of a guy named Archie who, according to the version I first heard of this story, but you can modify it, lived in the bayous of Louisiana. And the warden started getting reports that Archie was going dynamite fishing. So the warden got upset, and the warden went out one day and tracked down Archie and said, I hear these stories. And Archie said, well, warden, why don't you come with me? We'll go out and we'll do some fishing. So the warden gets in Archie's boat, and they paddle out into the middle of the swamps down there. And at a certain point, Archie gets to the place he's looking for and opens his tackle box and takes out a stick of dynamite and lights it. And the warden says, that is absolutely illegal, and you're going to go to jail for that, and I'm going to lock you away for so long you're never going to fish again. And Archie flips the stick of dynamite into the warden's lap and says, now, warden, is you going to talk, or is you going to fish? Right, and I like that because that is, in a way, a terrorism joke. And increasingly, our answer, and it hasn't changed all that much over the years, is we're going to talk. We love to talk. We don't much like to fish. And I must tell you a bit about myself. We have 3 children. One of them is a woman who is a high official in the Defense Intelligence Agency, and therefore I don't know exactly what she does. But I do know that she was twice in Iraq and twice in Afghanistan. And then we have 2 boys, both graduates of Rice University and veterans of the United States, as the president calls them, Marine Corps. And the older one was twice in Iraq, and the younger one was in Afghanistan. And they're both logistics officers. And I want to tell you that there is nothing worse in life than to be the parent of a logistics officer in wartime, because what they do is lead convoys in the most dangerous places. And so when it comes to being blown up, as so many of our guys were blown up in Iraq and Afghanistan, they're in the first vehicle all the time. So as people say, there is no atheist in the foxhole, and Barbara and I learned that it's true of their parents as well. Nothing has been a greater stimulus to intense religious faith and even conviction than having children on the battlefield. So anyway, a long way of saying we take this stuff seriously. We're a military family. The number of Americans who are directly affected by the war, by the fighting, by what's going on in the world is minuscule. We were down to at one point 5% of Congress that had actual military experience. I think it's back up now to something like 12 or 13 or maybe even 15%, but that's a scandal. So these are the people who are voting on basic issues of war and peace, and military budgets, and military appropriations, and military acquisitions, and hardly any of them knows the first thing about military anything. They haven't been there. They haven't done it. And so it's hard for them to get it. Look at our media class. I can't think of one of the leading news anchors or TV commentators that has ever served in any branch of military service. Not one. And yet they are telling us what to believe and what to think and what to do, and they're criticizing the government and so on as if they knew. But these are things that you really cannot learn. You can't learn fully, for sure, from reading books or articles or going to the movies and so on. You know, Americans really believe in movies. It's a great thing. No one reads books anymore. I'm an author. I've written, I think, 33 books now. And I can promise you that hardly anybody has read any of them. And as time goes on, more and more will read less and less of that stuff, because I belong to the University Club in Washington, D.C., and there's a steam room in there, which I frequent. And there are times when that steam room is full of the most famous people you can imagine. And I call them famous people I do not recognize with clothes. All right? So one of these famous people I don't recognize with clothes is Rumsfeld. He's in there all the time. And he's amazing, let me tell you. I mean, he had double hip replacement not so long ago, and within 3 weeks he was playing squash again. I mean, he's amazing. So anyway, so we're in there, and he says to me, did you read my book? I said, no. And he said, why not? I said, I'm not going to read your book. Your book is 900 pages long. And he said, well, I wanted to make sure it was complete. I said, nobody in this day and age will read a book that's 900 pages long. Nobody. I mean, we're in a world now where people's attention span is between 6 and 8 minutes, because that's how long it runs between commercials. No, really. I mean, it's just a mechanic. This whole generation, all these kids now that are coming out of our best universities and so on, by and large, they concentrate 6 to 8 minutes at a time. And they will do much better if there's movement on the screen. So if you make a video, you're more likely to have an effect than if you write a book. And I keep on arguing with publishers. Publishers still want big, fat books. And I keep saying to them, probably the perfect length for a book nowadays is about 80 pages. Because maybe there is some hope that somebody who really gets interested in something will read through 80 pages. But much more than that, forget it. And Rumsfeld didn't like that. I don't like it either. But here we are. People don't read books. On the other hand, everybody believes that they know the story, for example, of how we got Osama bin Laden, because they've seen the movie. Right? It reminds me, it's like, I once wrote a section of a book. I wrote a book about Machiavelli, and I wrote a section of that book about Machiavelli's hero, which is Moses, and about the event in Moses' life which led Machiavelli to greatly admire him, which is what happened after the worship of the golden calf. Now, as I said to all my friends, this is one of those stories which everybody thinks they know because they've seen the movie, but they haven't read the book, so they don't really know what happened. And so when I say, no, I wrote this thing, and then people say, well, what are you doing? I'm writing a book on Machiavelli. Oh, how interesting. What's that all about? And I said, well, it's about the golden calf. Oh, what about it? I said, well, you know, hardly anybody knows that Moses killed 7,000 people. Huh? And everybody goes, huh? And yet if you go and read it, what you'll find is that what you saw in the movie comes down from the mountain, sees this thing going on, gets really angry, smashes the tablets. And then the movie says, and he went back up and got a new set of tablets because, they couldn't work with those. And then they moved on, as we say nowadays. No. Moses looked at these people who were worshiping the golden calf, and he said, all those who stand with the Lord, come to me. And the Levites showed up. I like this story because I'm one of them. I'm a Levine. Ledeen used to be Levine, which was Levi, and so on and so on. And the Levites show up, and Moses says to them, kill them all. And the Levites drew their swords and killed almost all of them. And Machiavelli says everybody has to admit, looking seriously at that situation, that to create a new religion and a new nation, it was necessary to kill thousands of people. And that's my Machiavelli. And that's the world we really live in. If you read the books, you'll find out some of these things. If you just watch the movies, you'll never get it, because the movie doesn't get you there. The movie doesn't show you that, right? So the world we live in is a world where people are killing each other all the time. Some years ago, Harvard University Kennedy School made a terrible mistake and invited me to a conference. And one of their speakers at this conference was a woman, one of their stars, an international lawyer, full of awards and so on and so forth. And she gave a little talk to us in which she explained how things were getting better in the world because more and more conflicts were being negotiated and not fought. And that a lot of this was credited to international law and to international lawyers. She's one of them. Kennedy School indulges in all of this and so on. And I said to her, how can you stand here in front of us and tell us these things when we have just lived through the most horrible century in the history of the world? Right? I mean, no century compares to the 20th century in terms of slaughter and mayhem and oppression and slavery and all the rest of it. Nothing compares to it. And we sent hundreds of thousands of Americans to die fighting these various evils. And here we are again, and we're going to have to do it again, because the bottom line of what I want to say to you tonight is there is no escape from this. There is no way out. And so all the people who say to you, and I know it's very popular, and I know it feels great to say it, who say, we don't really have anything at stake in Syria, let alone Iran. Why should we commit power to one of those places? And the answer is because if we don't do it there, we're going to do it here. Because they have no intention of stopping until they've done us in. That is what they are all about. It is what they have been about all along. It is what they were about all through the 20th century. It's what Hitler was about and Stalin was about and Mao and Fidel and all the rest of them. The very existence of the United States is a threat to tyrants. Always has been. The United States comes into being as a rebellion against tyranny, as the establishment of freedom. And so tyrants have always hated us. And tyrants have always recognized, as they recognize today, that as long as we exist, and especially if we flourish, they're in jeopardy, they the tyrants. And they're in jeopardy above all from their own people, because their own people take a look, especially now when everybody can watch the evening news. Their people just take a look and say, people live better in America. I think I'd rather be in Beverly Hills than Damascus. Now it sounds kind of vulgar, but that's what it reduces to. Iran, which is my particular affliction, the Iranians have taken over big chunks of Southern California. Our Iranians, not their Iranians. You know, the mayor of Beverly Hills is Iranian. If you drive through Beverly Hills, I have relatives in Beverly Hills. I'm from there, and I'm from LA, and so I drive around there from time to time. But it seems to me, all the real estate people in Beverly Hills are Iranians. And there's a website that only shows expensive houses that Iranian Americans own, and most of them are in Los Angeles. So, okay, bottom line, people in Iran, lots of them, have relatives in Beverly Hills, or Orange County, or San Francisco, or Long Island. Iranian Americans are among the most successful immigrant communities we have or have ever had. They do exceedingly well. They're greatly successful. They're very smart. They're very cultured. Their kids do, you know, wonders in the oil business and engineering and all of that. I mean, they do very well. So the Iranians know firsthand from their relatives because they have emails and SMSs and all that stuff. And they communicate, well, what's it like over there? What does a chicken cost? And how come you people in Beverly Hills can afford chickens and we here in Tehran can't? What's that all about? Well, I like to ask people what's that all about question about Iran. We've all watched these street demonstrations in Iran in which people are shouting, "Death to America," right? You've all seen it. And whether it's Khamenei, the supreme leader, leading the chants, or whether it was Ahmadinejad, the last president, or whether it's Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, and so on. They're all there saying, "Death to America, death to America, death to America." So sometimes I bring a video of these scenes from Iran. You see all this death to America. And when it's over, I ask people, what do you think they mean? What do you think it means, death to America? Is it some kind of street party? I mean, is it a local kind of form of culture? Does it sound better in Farsi than it does in English? Right, so now we've got a new president in Iran, Rouhani, who's supposed to be a moderate. And this guy just a couple of months ago in public said, you know, death to America isn't just a slogan, you have to act on it. So here we are. And these are people who have been, give you a short history of the Islamic Republic of Iran, the one we've got today. In 1979, the Ayatollah Khomeini overthrew the Shah, took control of the country, and declared war against the United States. He then waged war against the United States as best he could until he died, about 10 plus years later. And then he was succeeded by the new supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, who has waged war against us ever since. And the Iranians kill Americans all the time. They kill us in Lebanon, they kill us in Syria, they kill us in Iraq and Afghanistan and Somalia, wherever they can. And if they run out of Americans to kill, there's Jews. And they kill Jews all over the place too, whether it's Bulgaria, as they did recently, where they bombed a bus of Israeli tourists, or Buenos Aires, where they blew up Jewish Social Center and so on. That's what they do. So I wrote a little piece recently that I liked because I liked the way I got to the point about it. And there was a long article I was remarking about that was published in the New Yorker by a good journalist. And it was a portrait of the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard's Quds Force, whose name is General Soleimani. And at a certain point in there, they tell a story about General Soleimani, who was negotiating with Americans just before we invaded Afghanistan in 2001. And in there's an American diplomat who's telling this good American journalist that General Soleimani was really cooperating and really helping us and giving us information and telling us what to do and what not to do and so on. And then President Bush gave the Axis of Evil speech, in which he listed Iran as part of the world's 3 evilest countries. He was in there along with Iraq and North Korea. And says this guy to this good journalist who writes about it in the New Yorker, that tore it for Soleimani. General Soleimani threw a tantrum, he yelled and screamed, and he said, well, he said, I've been telling my people maybe we should reevaluate our whole idea about America, what it is, how we should work with them, and so on. But, you know, there they gave this speech, he called us evil, the hell with them. And he stormed out of the room. And the American diplomat who tells the story said, well, there you see, 2 words changed the history of the world. Except that no serious person can believe that General Soleimani ever believed for a second that he should reevaluate his idea of the United States. General Soleimani's in the killing Americans business. And in fact, at that very moment, when General Soleimani was giving lectures to this poor American diplomat about how America should behave and how America should show more respect for Iran and so on, there were teams of Iranian assassins in Afghanistan hunting for American soldiers while that was going on. And I know that because I was at a meeting at that time overseas, and I was given information about who these would-be assassins were and where they were and so on. I gave it to our people in Special Forces, and the people in Special Forces called me about 2 months later and said, thanks for that. It all checked out, and we took care of them. And those were General Soleimani's people, his people. So I said, there are conclusions to be drawn from this, and lessons for us to learn. Number 1, the Iranians are perfectly capable of cooperating with us on all kinds of things. At the same time, they're killing us. Get that straight. It's not all or nothing. It's not either they love us or they hate us. No. They're very happy to get what they can from us by being nice and kill us because they hate us and they want to destroy it. So that's number 1. Number 2 is be serious about people. I mean, General Soleimani is a guy who has spent decades killing Americans. He's one of the great killers of modern times. Understand who he is, and respect is the wrong word, but take him seriously. Because given the chance, he would kill us all. I work in downtown Washington. Every day in the evening when I drive home and I look in the rearview mirror and there's no mushroom cloud, I say, that was a good day. Because they're trying. You will read from time to time, here and there, amazing statements like, after all, the terrorists have not attacked us since 9/11 here in the United States. But that's completely false. They've attacked us over and over and over again. The Iranians tried to organize the assassination of the Saudi ambassador to Washington. That would have blown up a restaurant with a lot of glass in the window and would have killed a lot of people, some inside the restaurant, some walking by. That's a terrorist attack. And it's not that they didn't attack us, it's that they failed in their intent and their attempt to attack us. There are other people, a guy from Guinea who's in jail in New York for trying to blow up Kennedy Airport, to sabotage the gas lines leading into Kennedy Airport, and he came quite close. And he was captured as he got on an airplane in Jamaica that was going to fly him to Tehran. It was all set up. The Boston Massacre, what's that? Is that not terrorists trying to kill us? And we're very lucky that they didn't kill more. I mean, for the most part, we have survived. We have been very fortunate to find that most of those terrorists who have attacked us have failed because they set their own underwear on fire. Or they blow up their own pair of sneakers. And by the way, I have a theory about what happened on that airplane with the sneaker bomber, and I'm positive that I'm right. All right, here's a guy. You're on a crowded airplane flying across the Atlantic Ocean. This guy reaches into his pocket, takes out a pack of matches, and lights one. What happens? Person down the road from him yells, "Oh my God, he's going to smoke a cigarette!" And everybody jumps him. And so we were saved from the stinker bomber by Mayor Bloomberg of New York, who doesn't even realize it. But that's certainly what happened, isn't it? I mean, there's no way somebody says, that guy's going to blow us up with his explosive sneakers. Nobody said that. Nobody knew that. Didn't occur to anyone. All right? It's like, there was this with liquids. It never occurred to anybody that people would be carrying things that looked like water bottles on airplanes and they would actually be explosives. Until we found them at Heathrow. And ever since, we've been unable to enjoy an airplane flight because it's become unbearable. So here we are. So let me tell you what we're in for and what we're facing. No one likes to talk about this. No one likes to write about it in Washington because nobody has any intention of doing anything about it, because that's painful and expensive, and you come in for criticism. And most of the time in this activity, as in so many others, you're going to fail, and then you get blamed for your failures, even though somebody's got to fail, because if you don't fail, you'll never get it right. So anyway, here's what we're facing. We're facing a global alliance of tyrants that runs from North Korea to Russia, Iran, Iraq, increasingly, Syria, parts of Lebanon, across the Middle East, and down into South America, where we've got Venezuela, Bolivia, Nicaragua, and Honduras. No. Anyway, I always forget the last one. There's one other. They don't make cigars, so I have no reason to remember them. Whereas Venezuela makes terrific cigars, and so does Nicaragua, and it drives me crazy. My political convictions are very vulnerable to quality of cigar tobacco. Anyway, these people are cooperating with each other in every which way. They have banking agreements that enables each and every one of them to launder money through the banks of all the other countries. And it enables them to cover up all kinds of commercial transactions and to lie about them. So when, for example, the Russians say, we are not going to sell S-300 anti-aircraft missiles to the Iranians, and everybody goes, oh, what a good thing that is. But the Iranians have the A-300 anti-aircraft missiles, and they got them from Caracas, because the Russians sold them to Chavez, and Chavez sent them over to his buddies in Tehran. And that's one of the many things that a global alliance of this nature produces for us. And so all kinds of weapons of mass destruction are down there in Venezuela. Venezuela is very close to us, very close. It's, and there's a big traffic. There is an airplane flight. I'm sure you've heard about this. Everybody's heard about this now. There's a famous weekly, at least, airplane flight that goes from Tehran to Caracas and back. It's a big plane. It's a 747 cargo. And nobody knows exactly what is on that plane or who is on that plane, because it has passengers too. What we do know is that it has its own gate at Caracas International Airport. The people who get off that plane and come into Venezuela aren't required to show passports. On the contrary, they are given Venezuelan passports. And off they go. Where do they go? Well, we don't exactly know where they all went. And we're not really interested in investigating it in any great detail either, because we don't want to know about this. Because to find as we would find, I'm quite confident, if we investigated it seriously, that there's quite a large terrorist operation aimed at the United States, running in our hemisphere, and has been there for some years, and it's only getting bigger and worser. That news is not the kind of news that some bureaucrat wants to hear, because he's got to do anything. He's got to do something about it. And what is he going to do about it? Declare war on Venezuela? Is he going to get a Congress which can't even keep the World War II monument running without obstruction? Is he going to get Congress to suddenly adopt emergency legislation to go after these people? I mean, if you look at what's going on down there on the borders of Venezuela, as Venezuela runs over towards big countries like Argentina and Colombia and so forth, you find an amazing eruption of Shiite mosques. Now, I put it to you, you probably aren't experts on Venezuela, but you probably realize that Shiism is not the major religion of Venezuela, and it is not normal for mosques to be sprouting up on the borders of Venezuela. What are those things, and what are they doing there? I will promise you that a goodly number of them are terrorist training centers, because mosques have been terrorist training centers all along, for a very long time. I mean, when 9/11 happened, I called a friend of mine, a Muslim friend, and I said to him, all right, you know, the one thing I don't understand in all of this is that I imagine that at a certain moment, some evil person somewhere gave an order. And he said, okay, do it tomorrow, or Friday, or the day after tomorrow. What is it? Do it. And this order was then communicated to his terrorists, who, after all, were already here, as we know, and had been here for a while. And I said, what I don't get is how that guy who gave the order could have the slightest confidence that that order would be carried out. Because what he should know about the United States is that we are an extremely seductive country. People come here hating us, and they fall in love with us. Americans are nice. Americans are open. Americans are the opposite of what most of these people have been brainwashed to believe about us. So, okay, wasn't there some risk that at least some of these guys would come over here and actually like it here? I mean, some guy in Florida, some guy in San Diego might like it and might decide not to do it. How was control exercised? And this friend of mine laughed at me, quite rightly. And he said, they knew. He said, that's what the imams are for. That's why the mosques are there. The enforcement mechanism, the control mechanism, is the mosque. And a great writer who wrote the biography of the man who killed Daniel Pearl has a great line in his book. He said, it is not true that all mosques are radical. And it is not true that all people who go to mosques become radical Islamists. But it is true that all radical Islamists were radicalized in a mosque by a radical imam or by an assistant of a radical imam. That's where it happens. And that's a huge problem for us, as you all recognize, right? Because, look, we found just outside Washington, in Northern Virginia, a mosque and school where that was run by the Saudis. And these kids were being educated with textbooks that were teaching them to hate Christians, hate Jews, hate Americans, kill all the infidels, and all this stuff, right? And that language came from the Quran, or as our president likes to call it, the Holy Quran. And the Quran has that sacred language about killing us. And it is all, according to the First Amendment, protected speech. That's protected speech. This is one of the big problems we've got. Because we cannot shut down that speech as things stand today. And there's even some question, and the Muslims know it, and both the good ones and the not so good ones are fighting a big campaign along these lines, which is they don't want FBI people going into the mosques and listening to sermons. And they don't want scholars from the Hudson Institute going and reading the textbooks in Arabic that they're using to educate the kids in their schools. So, okay, so here's this global alliance. And they're trying to do us in and blow us up. Add to that the Saudis. And if you ask about the Saudis, are they our friends or are they our enemies? The answer is yes. They are. Because the Saudis, for all that they help us in all kinds of manners, the Saudis are the ones who fund this global network of radical mosques and madrasas, which is the assembly line for the next generation of terrorists. And it's their doctrine that is in their books. It's their Wahhabi Sunni doctrine. They are the ones who are financing it all. And that's death for us. So we have a variety of things to do. Let me quickly, because I'm sure I've talked more than I should have. Let me tell you there's a way to fix this. And the way we've gone about it is not the smartest way. Well, everybody knows that. There's no way out of this war, so we have to wage it. Forget it when our politicians say, it's enough already with war, we're exhausted. Everybody's always exhausted. I mean, everybody works too much in America anyway, so if we're not exhausted from war, we're exhausted from work. We can either win this war or lose it, but we can't get out of it because they won't let us out. They're going to keep coming after us until either we've beaten them or they've destroyed us. Okay, the centerpiece, the keystone of that global alliance is Iran. Because it's Iran, go to the State Department. Every year the State Department comes out with a list of countries that support terrorism. Iran always wins the blue ribbon, always. There's no one who's even close. Because Iran has created these monster terror organizations. Islamic Jihad, that's an Iranian creation. Hezbollah, that's an Iranian creation. The Quds Force of the Revolutionary Guards, that's an Iranian creation. That's the A-League. These other people whose names nobody can remember for more than one evening at a time. Name appears, al-Nusra. Does anybody here know who al-Nusra is? What that's all about? And this guy that was just captured, al-Libi, why is he under arrest? You don't know. We don't know. But Hezbollah, that we know about. Quds Force, that we know about, because they kill people all the time. Just to give you the shortest example, if it were not for Hezbollah and Quds Force, Bashar Assad would not exist today. He would have fallen. He would have been defeated. He's in power solely because the Iranians took over the war and sent their soldiers to die on the Syrian battlefields. And they've lost plenty of soldiers, which was a surprise to me. I didn't think they were going to do that. I think of Iranians as people like to train other people to die, not to go and die themselves. But this is a case in which they have shown genuine resolve, which just shows how important it is to them to keep the Syrian piece of this network alive and functioning. You bring down the regime in Tehran, Damascus will go the next day. And with Damascus goes some of the world's biggest terrorist organizations. And all of a sudden, these huge problems that we are facing, problems like Syria, problems like Venezuela, problems like Russia and so on, they will get easier. They won't be solved. Big problems like these aren't ever finally solved, at least not in our lifetimes. But things are getting an awful lot better. And as it happens, it's easy to bring down, at least I think, it's easy to bring down the regime in Tehran. Don't have to fire a shot, don't have to drop a bomb. All this endless discussion about bombing Iran and beating the Russian anti-aircraft system. And will the Israelis do it, or will we do it, or will we do it together, or will nobody do it, and so on. It's completely unnecessary. Totally unnecessary. Neither Israel nor the United States has to risk a single life of a single soldier to bring an end to this regime in Tehran. All they have to do, all we have to do, is support the Iranian people against a regime that they hate and that they demonstrate that they hate. They've showed us time and time again that they hate it. I mean, in 2009, when millions of people took to the streets demanding an end to the regime, that was Obama's most horrible moment, when he endorsed the tyrants. Didn't have one word to say on behalf of these kids in the streets risking their lives to be free of the monsters that are killing us every day. Right? And time again, and all Obama does is run after the Iranians trying to make a deal. Well, instead of trying to make a deal with people who want us dead, make a deal with the people who want an end to that regime. If we put half the energy and enterprise into that we've put into trying to find some Iranian who would talk to us, then we'd be way ahead of the game. Even the Washington Post, my local newspaper, says that if you want to solve the nuclear problem in Iran, change the regime. That's the only way. There is no other way. And I'll be happy to answer questions about, if it comes to this. Unfortunately, I do not believe that either the Israelis or the Americans have a proper understanding of how explosive Iran is and how frightened the regime leaders in Iran are of their own people. That they're always, because that gets to the core of what this is all about. Why are they afraid of their own people? I explained it to you. Because they want to live in Beverly Hills. Because they don't like it in Tehran. And the women don't like me until they have to cover up their heads all the time without a strand of hair showing. Do you know why? By the way, it's fascinating to me that we talk about these things on the evening news endlessly, and no one ever explains why. Do you know why they have to cover their hair? No. They have to cover their hair because Iranian men believe that women's hair emits an irresistible, corrupting, sexual force. And that if the hair is exposed, this kind of radiation comes flowing out, corrupts the Iranian men who, left to their own devices, would never do anything improper, and drives them crazy, drives them into a sexual frenzy. And therefore, that hair has to be covered up. And that's the thing that more than anything else, the Iranians worry about, which is women showing hair. That can't be tolerated. Iranian women wear all kinds of very attractive clothing. Some of them wear blue jeans, some of them wear, and some of them show a bit of ankle, which they're not supposed to, but it's rare that they get arrested for it. But boy, you take off your headscarf, you're in prison. Because they're, it's, as the punchline of one of my favorite jokes goes, I may be crazy, but I'm not stupid. That's the Iranians. They're crazy. Really crazy. Really, really crazy. But they're smart. And they're extremely good at terrorism, murder, torture, and technology. When they talk about, they're building good missiles. They have a good educational system. They will produce a nuclear weapon because we're not going to stop it. And then the question will become, then what? Then what? So I hope I've worried you enough. One of these days, something will happen that will somehow bring us to one of these famous tipping points that I keep reading about all the time. About, little changes. Hegel used to say that this was the transformation of quantity to quality, which was you got a lot of little changes, and then all of a sudden, voila, You have a really big change, something fundamental changed. We're living through something like that right now. We're living through what the historians call a paradigm shift. That is, for a long time, we lived in a world, a very lucky world, from roughly the end of the Second World War to, I don't know, 8 to 10 or 20 years ago. A world in which we knew the rules, in which, by and large, big wars were unlikely to happen, in which we had a huge amount of control over events. That world is gone. Nobody gives a damn anymore what the Americans think. Certainly not in the Middle East. Anybody who had any doubts, those doubts were eliminated by Obama's behavior over Assad. Because one day he said, we're going to bomb you, Assad. And we even, as it turns out, called the Israeli government, because we'd promised, and we said to them, we're about to bomb Syria, get ready. And then all of a sudden, we didn't bomb Syria. So if you're an Israeli, and you just lived through that, what would you think about an American official who said to you, don't worry, so Iran has nuclear weapons, we'll protect you. You can count on us. But we just went through this thing with the Syrians, which is a hell of a lot easier to deal with than Iran. Right? Syria is 20 some odd million people. Iran is 75 to 80 million people. It's a big country. It's a big army. It's a lot of terrorists. It's a lot of technology. They're very smart, and they're all over the place. And we can win this thing peacefully just by going to their opponents in Iran and saying, okay, we're with you. What do you need? And we don't know all the things they need. They undoubtedly need ways to communicate between one another that they don't have. And they probably need some money. But there we are. But it's just a matter of time before we get to the point where it all, one day we wake up and it all goes boom. And then we'll have to go back to the battlefield. I'm sorry. So I'm sorry to give you this bad news. But that's where we're at. And I implore you, I mean, you people are doing so many good things to try to transform American politics before it's totally too late. Send people to Washington who know something about the world. Of the various criteria that we need among people going to Washington, that is, people who've read the Constitution, people who will defend us against the expansion of tyranny in the executive branch and so forth, there's another one, somebody who knows something about war, someone who's been in uniform. We need those people. Of course, doesn't solve anything, everything. I mean, Hegel, after all, served. Carey, after all, served. It's not always a solution. Okay, questions? Have at it.
Thank you very much. That was incredibly informing, and I think we all appreciate what you had to say. One thing that concerns me is that if we were to support a group in Iran that was against the government, that isn't there a possibility that they may be Al-Qaeda or Hezbollah or Hamas?
My Grandma Masha, who came from Russia, and who was the political philosopher of our family, always said, things are never so bad they can't get worse. So I take your question. Yes, it's possible. It is possible. It's very unlikely. Because because this regime already does all that. You don't need Al-Qaeda. I mean, this is a regime that protects Al-Qaeda. So why should Al-Qaeda try to fight against this regime? Makes no sense. They're already in cahoots. If it's all right with you, I'm going to sit down for a minute.
Sure.
All right. Next question. Sir.
Yep.
How does the reinvention of Vladimir Putin and the Russians fit into this whole equation?
Well, how does the reinvention of Putin and the Russians fit into all of this? Well, he's not a reinvention. Putin is a is a KGB officer who did not like it when the Soviet Union fell. He said publicly that he thinks the fall of the Soviet Union is one of the great disasters in the history of the world. And he would like to restore Russia to its position of former greatness, as he sees it. And he's been trying to do that. It's very hard, because Russia's a basket case. You know, Russia has a diminishing population, and the population they've got is largely alcoholic. When female college students at the best Russian universities are asked, what's your favorite career path for the future, something like 60% of them say prostitution. Right? I mean, it's a country with bad morale and alcoholism and very low birth rate. It doesn't have an army that's worth a damn anymore. So he was destined for the garbage pile of history until we came along and started giving him all these wonderful opportunities. And he's been taking advantage. I mean, who would have dreamed that the United States could have worked this parlay? You know, it's a billiard shot in Syria, which guaranteed the happy outcome that Iran, Russia, and Syria win, and any possible good guy, if there are any good guys in there, loses. And yet we found a way. We've done that. It's amazing. And so Putin, of course, is no idiot, at least not that way, so he took it. They offered it to him, and he took it. That's it. I don't think it shows any great genius on his part. I mean, he's a petty tyrant. And he's a thief. And he's, you know, look at the way he lives. Look at his villas and his helicopters and his private jets and his yachts and so forth. He reminds me a lot of my old friend Adnan Khashoggi, the Saudi, who did it better because he at least had more fun and lived in warm climates. Yes, in the back.
Hi, you spoke to our exhaustion with war, and in particular not going to Syria. Is there any merit to letting them continue to fight each other?
Yes, there's plenty of merit in letting them fight each other, especially because we can't stop it. And so the happiest we can feel about what's going on in Syria is to say, well, here are these two evil groups and they're killing each other. Isn't that nice? Unfortunately, somebody's going to win. And the way we have permitted this to evolve, whoever wins is going to be someone who hates us. It's either going to be Assad with the Iranians and the Russians, and they hate us for big geopolitical and ideological reasons, or it's going to be the so-called opposition, and they will hate us because we betrayed them. We failed to support them when, according to our tradition and their logic, we should have supported them. And then we lied about what we were doing, because the newspapers for a couple of years anyway have been full of this nonsense, saying that we were helping the opposition in Syria when we weren't. Unless you think having training a few of them in Jordan constitutes help. They were not getting weapons that would be useful to fight against the Air Force, Syrian Air Force, or against Syrian tanks, or things like that. We weren't giving them anything like what they needed to fight effectively. So yes, for a few days we can say, isn't this nice, all these rotten people, and they're killing each other. But they'll get around to killing us. It's what they want, after all. I mean, that's their bottom line. It's their dream. Yeah.
So it's your conclusion then that American support would best be served in a more background role, aiding the Iranians in fighting this regime rather than us having our own boots on the ground?
Yes. In fact, at the time of the Iraq War, I said we were fighting the wrong war at the wrong time in the wrong place. That is, if we were going to wage war against terrorism, which is what Bush said this was all about, the number one target had to be Iran, not Iraq, because Iran is the world's biggest sponsor of terrorism. And to fight Iran effectively, you didn't have to send armies in. All you had to do was help the Iranian people do the job. Look, I was in the Reagan administration. That's what we did to the Soviet Union. We brought it down by subverting it, by supporting their internal enemies. And in the end, it just imploded. It just died. If we could bring down the Soviet Empire was a really big deal. Without firing a shot, without invading, without dropping bombs and so on. Don't tell me we can't do the same in Iran. It's got to be much easier. So that's what I think. Right? And they haven't even offered me soft walls.
Could you flip that logic around and say what you say we should do to Iran? Are they doing that to us now?
Well, they'd like to, but it's very hard here because you don't have 70 or 80% of the American public that hates our regime. No, the highest numbers, and believe me, the antipathy for President Obama does not approach the hatred for Supreme Leader Khamenei. Because Obama, for his many faults, and he's got lots of them, is not rounding up people simply because they say things that he doesn't like, and putting them in jail, torturing them mercilessly, and then hanging them in public. That is what Khamenei does. So I mean, you can't. There is no moral equivalence between the United States and Iran, between the American government and the Iranian regime. It's just a complete misunderstanding of the way the world works to even permit yourself to think that way. Don't think that way. That's a completely different world. They have, you know, and most Iranian people would like to live like us. They got a long way to go, even if they got rid of their regime tomorrow and put in place an excellent constitution, of which they're entirely capable, by the way. They've had good constitutions in the past. Still, it'll take them a long time before they start sorting out how do you pass a law. I used to say, we did a really good thing for the Russians and it didn't work. We translated Robert's Rules of Order into Russian. And we distributed them inside the Soviet Union, all over Moscow. And still, when they got their own government back, they forgot it all. Didn't help. I mean, it takes a long time. Freedom is not easy. Freedom is very hard. Very hard.
Just following up on the young man's question, you were talking about facilitating, helping Iranian people really being the key. I'm curious, and then you kind of touched on Iraq a little. I'm curious what your take is on, after Saddam was toppled, whether Iraq actually has the potential to really be a positive force for change in the Middle East.
Yeah, I think it did. I think it was. In fact, after we defeated Al-Qaeda in Iraq, Al-Qaeda's recruiting went way down for quite a while. And then again, we did this unbelievable thing, right? There it was. We had Iraq, the Iraqis, you know, there were problems and so on and so forth. And the Iranians were desperate because they could not survive two free countries in league with the United States. Iraq on one side of them and Afghanistan on the other side of them. It was too much. So what happened? We solved their problem. We left. We went out of Iraq, leaving no one behind. No vestige of security. Now it had to be obvious to anybody, and was obvious. You talk to any soldier that served in Iraq, and he will tell you that it was perfectly obvious that the Iraqis could not defend themselves against Iranian depredations. And yet the President of the United States didn't get that. He was in such a hurry to get out. Right? I mean, the worst thing about Obama, if I can venture into this, because you're all dying to ask me, but you're too polite. The worst thing about Obama is that Obama is an icon from an educational system that is producing miseducated young Americans who believe that we are the fundamental cause of most of the world's problems. And that if you want to make the world a better place, the first and most urgent thing to do is to rein in the United States of America so that it can't do any more bad things, at least for a while, and give the world a chance. That's what Obama believes. That's what Valerie Jarrett believes. That's what Chuck Hagel believed. That's what John Kerry certainly believed at the time of Vietnam, and so on. So we've got a whole crowd, and I've often said, when people say, well, how can you explain Obama? Is he a Muslim? Is he this? Is he that? Well, maybe he is. He may be, right? I'm not smart enough. I don't know. I don't know what he was doing in Pakistan, for example. I would like to know. It's a mystery. Nobody knows. There are all these mysteries. I would like to know who his professors were at Columbia. Simple, innocent crime. All right, but it doesn't matter, right? I can give you 10,000 Obamas. Just go into the dormitory of any good liberal arts college in the United States right now, anywhere in the Ivy League, anywhere in the University of California system, and so on. Go down to the basement around about 11 o'clock at night, have a beer, and listen to the conversation. And that's what you'll get. That's what they are. That's the way they're being educated. That's who he is. That's what he is. And unfortunately, you can't have permitted an educational system that bad to flourish for that long and not get an Obama. You have to get at least one, and we'll have more before we're done. And there's a lot worse than he is. I mean, look at these people. I mean, have you looked carefully at Elizabeth Warren? Look at Elizabeth Warren. Why is Elizabeth Warren not in jail? Elizabeth Warren practiced law in the state of Massachusetts without a license from her office at Harvard Law School. Now, isn't that incredible? Why is she not in jail? Never mind why is she elected, right? Because Massachusetts. But, okay.
Thank you.
Let's let Bob Beaupre ask the last question.
I'm going to get in trouble with everybody else. Michael, as expected, a tremendous presentation, and you have, I think, sufficiently scared us all, certainly me. But you made a passing reference a little bit ago to 70–80%, and I think the reference was like the Green Revolution in Iran, that there's that much dissension. I'd like you to speak to that, because that is a massive number if it's really that large.
Well, it was a few years ago, and I can't imagine that it's diminished since. But
Then why didn't Obama? That's the second part
because
of the
he
question.
wanted.
Why didn't he give him a shout out when he got the Nobel Peace Prize?
Because he didn't want them to win. He didn't want them to win. He wanted Khamenei to win so that he, Obama, could do a deal with him.
That night.
It's whatever you want to call it, whether it's naive or whether it's something worse. I mean, I wrote a whole book called Accomplice to Evil. And the point of that book is that we refuse to see these evil things when they're right in front of our noses. Iran is easy to see. They tell us every day, death to America, death to America. What do you think they mean? You know, as they used to say in the schools that I went to when I was growing up, schmuck. What are you thinking? What is your problem? I mean, it's right there. He tells you, right? Just like Hitler told us, right? I spent the first 15 years of my professional life, let's call it, in the archives of fascist Italy. 15 years I spent going through all that stuff. Why? Because I wanted to try to find out how something like that could have happened. How could it have happened? How could it have happened on both sides? How could they have done it? I mean, after all, Germany and Italy are not barbarian countries. Germany and Italy are two of the most cultured, civilized, elegant, refined, ethical countries in the modern world, and were in the 1920s. They are the two countries who gave us fascism. So that's a real, so how does that work? Right, so I was trying to figure all that out. And then one day somebody said to me, there is no it. It's not an it. You have to look, these things happen, tiny little changes bit by bit, until finally you get there. It's like whoever that wonderful Protestant pastor was who said, you know, first they came for the communists and we didn't do anything, and then they came for the Jews and we didn't do anything, and then they came for the Catholics and we didn't do anything, and then they came for us and then there was nobody else left. Right? And that's what happens. So when you don't stand up against these evil regimes in these evil countries, they get stronger and stronger. And so they're getting stronger and stronger. You know, some Iranian said the other day, for my many sins, I read the Iranian press every day, and some guy, I forget who, maybe the chairman of their Joint Chiefs, said, we're at a point now where we can attack any American target in the Middle East, and they will be unable to respond. Now, I don't believe that. We will be able to respond. But what I actually believe is that they could attack any American target in the Middle East, and we would blame it on Al-Qaeda. We would not blame it on the Iranians, even though we knew they did it. Because we don't want trouble with Iran. We want to deal with Iran. That's what I believe. That's I think, is the state of mind that we're in. Okay, let's go eat. I'm hungry.